Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. This is going to be part 2 of my video regarding that the Prophet Muhammad's name needs to be specifically mentioned in the Bible and the Torah, as the Christians assert. The Christians claim that this specific name apparently is stated in the Quran. The Quran apparently demands, and the Hadith and the Quran demand, that Muhammad's name must be mentioned in the Torah and the Injeel. So the Christians say that this is a false prophecy in the Quran because nowhere is he specified in the Torah or in the Injeel specifically by name. I showed in part 1 of the video that this is false and that the Christians are supposed to look for Muhammad in the Old Testament or the Injeel in the same way they look for Jesus in the Old Testament. And of course, Christians never look for the specific name mentioned in the Old Testament. They look at other vague, different interpretations, and then they say, oh, look, this is Jesus. So the Quran is instructing in the same fashion. When it says he'll be mentioned by name, this doesn't mean the exact name, because the Prophet Muhammad's got about 5 names. It doesn't mean the exact name, but the name as in his description. And I did mention this in part 1 of my video, but I want to show a bit more emphasis to this. According to the Old Testament, it says that when a child is born, his name will be called Emmanuel. This is referring to Jesus. So the Old Testament is making a prophecy, a future prophecy, that in the New Testament, when a son is born, when Jesus Christ is born, he will be called Emmanuel, this specific name. However, you can go into the New Testament, Jesus is never once called Emmanuel when he was born in the New Testament. So is this now a false prophecy? Because Christians actually called him Jesus. It doesn't say that he was born and then when he was born he was called Emmanuel. Nowhere in the New Testament. So a Christian will say, oh, but it doesn't have to mention it. We know Jesus by description. He could be called Jesus, blah 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 blah. So why don't they apply that same standard to the Prophet Muhammad when being mentioned in the Injeel or the Torah or the New Testament? We don't then obviously need his specific name. We could just look for his description. So when the Quran says you will find him by name, this is obviously talking about his description. Otherwise, you're going to have to concede, and if you say that the Quran is false, then you're going to have to say that the Old Testament is wrong for making a false prophecy, because it said that they will call him Emmanuel. A son will be born and his name shall be Emmanuel. And he's never called Emmanuel in the New Testament. When he was born, they called him Jesus. Furthermore, we can even add another point. If you open up Luke 24:44, in the New Testament, it is making a prophetic statement that apparently in the law of Moses, it is supposed to... Excuse me for that, I'm using my phone app, so a call came through, but just ignore that. So it is written in the law of Moses, in Luke 24:44, it says that it was written in the law of Moses, the prophets and the Psalms. Let's see what was written. We'll go to the next verse. Then he opened their minds so they could understand the scripture. Luke 24:46, it says, he told them, this is what is written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the 3rd day. Notice how it says he will rise from the dead on the 3rd day. This is apparently prophesied in the New Testament, saying this was exactly what was written in the Old Testament, in the law of Moses. In any law, it was written, there was supposed to be an inscription, a historical statement, that in the law of Moses, that he was supposed to die and rise on the third day. This is what it's supposed to say. It's explicit. It's saying this was written. It doesn't say it was verbal or someone just made a hearsay. It says it was written in the law of Moses. Now, you ask a Christian to bring a single historical record of the law of Moses where it makes the specific term rise and dead, he will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. See that term? Third day. It is nowhere in the Old Testament or in any historical record where this prophecy states exactly what it's supposed to say as it is mentioned in the New Testament. Nowhere. But you know what Christians do? Christians bring other verses of the Old Testament where it says that he will suffer and he will die. And it may even mention he will rise. But it doesn't use the specific term, he will rise after the third day. See, this is what it's written. It says, in the law of Moses, he will rise on the third day. A Christian, you ask him, I've debated many Christians. They've never shown me where it specifies the term third day. So since they can't show it, are we now going to say the New Testament made a falsified statement? Should we say that now? Maybe we should, because that specific term, third day, is not mentioned in the Old Testament. A Christian will say, oh no, it doesn't really mean it is written and it doesn't have to specify on the third day. We can just take it on the general sense that, you know, he will raise and he will die. He will die and raise, and that's basically it. It's talking about the same thing. So why, when it comes to Christianity, and the verses say it requires something specific, such as to be raised on the third day, Christians just rub that off, shove that aside and say, oh, you know, we don't have to look for the specific term. We can just look for the general term that Jesus will die and raise. But then why don't they use that same standard with the Prophet Muhammad? Why don't they then take the Quran when it says he'll be mentioned by name? Why don't they just say, oh, that just means in a general sense, we don't need to look for the specific name Muhammad in the New Testament or the Torah. We just have to look at his description in the general sense, whether it shows signs there showing that the Prophet Muhammad. So why the double standards when you want to look at the Quran and judge it from a different standard? Then when the same standard applies to your own Bible, then you want to judge the Bible differently. So this, in a nutshell, refutes, debunks the Christians never to ever play around with the Quran and try and ask for a specific when you don't judge your own Bible with that same standard. So stop being a hypocrite and be consistent. Thank you.